So as Father Isaac introduced me, my name is Deacon Eran, and if any of you have been here more than 3 years, you'll recognize me because I did my internship right here 3 years ago. And honestly, it's a great joy and pleasure to be here today and to serve you, to minister to you, and to continue to minister to you at the Lenten mission tonight, tomorrow night, and Tuesday night. And many of you know that you've been praying for me. I got ordained a deacon in September, just past September, and I will be getting ordained a priest on the 24th of May in Ottawa. So please continue to pray for me. Yes, it's very exciting. And there are four of us. There are four of us getting ordained this year, so it's a big year. Deacon Sebastian, many of you know, and Deacon Tim, who was here last summer, and Deacon Michael, the four of us. Now, I remember when I first joined the religious community that I belonged to, and Father Isaac and Father Simon, Father Dan belonged to, the Companions of the Cross, 8 years ago, so it takes a long time to be a priest. 8 years ago, when we joined, even before we take any seminary classes, even before we do any theology, we have to do a whole year of prayer, fasting, and meditation. We call it a spiritual year. And they send us to this very remote location in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of woods. We have this small farm property. It's called Assumption Farm. It's in a small town called Combamere, which is about 2 hours north of Ottawa. And we spend this whole year there in the beginning. And even more than that, every single summer we would go there to do a small retreat. And even on our breaks, some of us would like to go there just to have a vacation, have a small time of rest. So this past October, 3 of us decided to go there and spend some time. And to get there, we have to go through a small town. And this town is so small that their biggest city attraction is their Tim Hortons. So we got there. The 3 of us were Deacon Sebastian, myself, and my brother Dooley. Now, Deacon Sebastian is in the middle, you can clearly tell. Now, and one of the other guys is me, and one of the other guys is my brother, who's also a seminarian. I'll leave it to you to figure out which is which. I've been told we look a little similar. Anyway, so we were on the road traveling from Detroit, from our seminary to Combamere, and we had been to Assumption Farm many times, like I said, over every single year. So we knew the way to get there like the back of our hands. And this time, when we got to this small town, we were at this intersection, and we knew we had to go left. But we had a bit of a problem because there were some road closures. There was some construction. So we decided to take an alternate route. There shouldn't be any problems because we've taken this road as well. Nothing could go wrong. So we decided to take a different route. And the further we went, we realized that we were getting on this gravel road full of snow in the middle of the woods. In the middle of the night, there were no houses, no people around. It was completely quiet. Pretty soon, of course, we were lost. And we kept going, and we couldn't see our finish line. We were way off the freeway, and of course, we were dangerously low on fuel. Pretty soon, it occurred to us that there are so many horror stories that start just like this. 3 young, naive, good-looking people go on this adventure, and they decide to take an alternate route. They get lost in the woods, and an axe murderer comes and gets them. Thankfully, there were no axe murderers. So we kept going. We had no idea where we were going. We kept going on this path, and eventually, we got to a paved road. We got to civilization. And then my brother, who's sitting next to me, turns to me and said, "Hey, this intersection looks familiar." Yeah, we had done a big loop over half an hour and gone back to the same place where we were. So this time we decided to weave through the construction, weave through the blockades, and finally get to Assumption Farm. It was so late, and we were so tired and so frustrated, but thankfully we got to our final destination. Now, I tell you that story because I think this captures perhaps what many of you are experiencing in your lives. We get frustrated, we get tired, and we feel like we are going around in a circle with no end in sight. And I want to propose to you, and actually the gospel proposes to you, that it could be one of three reasons or some combination. The question is, what is your finish line? What is the big why that you do anything at all? What's the purpose? And secondly, what is your freeway? What's the road that's going to get you to that finish line? And thirdly, what is your fuel? What's going to nourish you and sustain you to make sure that you get to your destination? Now, the problem is that many of us are so busy with our routines, so busy with our lives, that we often can't afford the time to sit back, to pray, and ask God any of these questions. What is my finish line? What's my freeway? And what's my fuel? But God is continually inviting us to retreat ourselves, take a step back, a time of quiet, to reflect on where we're headed, how can I recalibrate my life, how can I recenter my life around God. And this 40 days of Lent is a beautiful opportunity to do just that. Now, it's not a coincidence that Lent is 40 days long. In fact, in the Bible, numbers often carry some meaning or connotation. So the number 40 stands for a time of temptation, a time of trial, a time of purification, and a time of recalibration or conversion. For example, think of the ancient Israelites who were escaping Pharaoh and slavery in Egypt with Moses, and they spent how many years? They spent 40 years in the desert on the way to the Promised Land. Now, in fact, that road, that freeway, you could say, should have only taken them about 2 weeks tops, but they were lost in the desert for 40 years. So that makes us look good, getting lost for about 20, 30 minutes. And I think the reason they were lost is because God wanted them to be in the desert for this time to purify themselves, to prepare themselves to be able to enter the Promised Land. This was a time of trial and testing to prepare them for their final destination, their finish line. Another example of 40, think of the gospel today. Jesus was in the desert for 40 days, not 40 years, 40 days. And he was tempted, he was tried, and this was in preparation for his earthly ministry. The gospel says, in fact, that after Jesus was baptized in the River Jordan, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, took him to the desert. In a way, he is going ahead of us to face these temptations, to weaken our enemy, the devil, and to show us how to rely on God's grace to get through our own temptations. And we're going to look at those three temptations, and we're going to see that every single temptation that we all face, from the beginning of Adam and Eve, the people of Israel, and even us today, every single temptation that we face essentially boils down to these three basic general temptations. And for us to make sense, I'm going to go through the three temptations in reverse order, and you'll see why. So the third temptation, Satan takes Jesus to the top of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, the temple is built already on a mountain, on the highest mountain, and the highest point of the temple would have been the highest point anybody saw when they looked around. So Satan takes Jesus to the very tip top, and he shows them, people would have been busy around doing their worship, doing everything around, and Satan says, why don't you jump if you're the Son of God? And God will send his angels to catch you, to save you. Now, you have to look a little deeper to understand why this was a temptation for Jesus. In a way, Jesus knew that his finish line, his goal, his mission was to be glorified by God the Father, not glorified by the people. So in a sense, Satan is saying, why don't you jump down, make a big spectacle of yourself, and everybody will come to see that you are the Messiah. In fact, the people were expecting a worldly king, a worldly Messiah to come and rule over them, to chase out the Romans. So in doing this, Jesus would make it very clear that he is so powerful, he would be raised up, he would be glorifying himself, and in the eyes of the world, he will be accepted. So that was the temptation. Satan is saying that don't worry about the finish line that God the Father has prepared for you, when in fact Jesus' goal is to glorify the Father and to be honored in the Father's eyes, not in the eyes of the world. Forget about all of that. Why don't you just make it clear right now? And people will accept you. People will honor you. They will put you on the throne. And that will be the end of it. And this temptation falls to us as well. When in fact God is the one who is going to glorify us, not the world, not ourselves, not our family members. And everything that we do has to be ultimately pointing towards God. So the question for us is, what is our finish line? Now, the second temptation. Satan takes Jesus to another high place, and he showed him all the kingdoms of the world. Now, you could imagine Satan showed him the ancient kingdoms, the present kingdoms of the time, and even perhaps the future kingdoms. And Satan tells Jesus, all of these things, all of these kingdoms, rulers belong to me. And if only you would bow down and worship me, I will give all of this to you right now. So what's the temptation in that? Jesus knew that the path that God the Father has prepared for Jesus, for that finish line, is going to go through the cross. Jesus is going to have to suffer and die. It's going to be painful. It's going to be difficult. Even though his mission was to win all the kingdoms of the world, this is why Jesus came, to win all nations and peoples to God, to establish God's kingdom on earth. He had to suffer. He had to die. So Satan here is saying, you came to win all these nations. I can give them to you right now. Forget about the cross. It's going to be painful. It's going to hurt. It's going to be difficult. Forget about all of that. I can give it to you right now. If only you do it my way. If only you worship me, then I can give you everything that you ever wanted. And that could be a temptation for us as well. Because many of us perhaps know where God is leading us. We know our finish line, but we don't quite know how to get there. Maybe our temptation is to take a shortcut, an easy way out. And then the first temptation. Remember, we are going backwards. So Jesus has spent 40 days in the wilderness, and he is hungry, he is famished, and Satan knows this. So Satan comes and says, hey, look at that rock. Doesn't that rock look delicious? And Jesus is tempted here to rely on his own power, his own strength, to nourish him, to sustain him. I don't know if any of you have been so hungry that rocks start to look delicious, but this is where Jesus was. And Satan was saying, you have the power to turn this rock into a loaf of bread, and you could eat it, and you could satisfy your hunger. Don't worry about God satisfying your needs. Don't rely on God's graces, his strength, because he might abandon you. He has all his glorious ideas for your finish line. He has his difficult path, but he's going to let you down. You're not going to make it to the end. You're going to run out of fuel. So rely on your own strength. Rely on your own power and gifts. And this can be a temptation as well, because many of us do have many gifts and talents, many charisms that God himself has given us. And the temptation is to rely on those instead of asking God for his help. So the question is, what is your fuel? When was the last time you actually prayed and asked God for his help? Perhaps for a financial situation, or for a health reason, or for some difficulty in your workplace or in your family. God is waiting to answer all of your prayers. Maybe some of you are thinking, that's great, Deacon Eran, but my life is a mess. Where do I even start? No? Just me? Well, my life is a mess, and I also need God, which is great. But my proposition for you is, start with the biggest and most important thing in your life. Perhaps the most important thing in your life is your family, is your spouse, or your children. Perhaps for some of you, it might be work or school, your education, or something else. So start with the biggest thing in your life and ask yourself, is God your finish line? Is the reason why this one thing is so big in your life, so important to you, because God has called you to do that? Or are you doing that because you want to glorify yourself? You want to look good in the eyes of your family members, in the eyes of the world, your coworkers? Do you want to be recognized? And is that why you're doing these things? Perhaps it is. And secondly, ask yourself, what is the way, the free way that you're going to take to get to that finish line? Have you ever been tempted to take a shortcut, an easy way out? And as my story in the beginning shows, that some shortcuts are not really shortcuts. It'll take you around on a big loop and you'll end back where you started. Have you ever faced a difficulty in your marriage or in your family life or at work where you're tempted to avoid the cross, to avoid the pain, and just take the easy way? If that is something that you've struggled with, you have to ask God to show you what's His path, what's the road that He has laid out for you, what's His freeway. And finally, ask yourself, what is the fuel that's going to sustain you in finishing this and getting to this finish line and finishing strong? Perhaps at work, you come home after a long day and you're frustrated, you're tired, and you keep doing this day in and day out. And it's fair that you feel discouraged, frustrated, and tired because you are relying on your own strength. But God is here to support you, to nourish you, to give you His grace, for God Himself to be your fuel, your driving force. Now, the thing is, a lot of us don't have an opportunity to give God time to reveal these answers to us. But we have a great opportunity coming up. We have our Lenten mission that we are starting tonight, continuing tomorrow night, and then on Tuesday night. This will be a great opportunity for you to take a step back from the busyness of your life and ask God to recalibrate you, to show you why you do the things that you do and what God wants you to do. For Him to show you the road, the path that He has prepared for you, the road that's going to bear the most fruit in your life. And it's an opportunity for the Holy Spirit to give you the power, the strength, and the life to make it to the end. So my invitation, my challenge for you is, make the time to come to this Lenten mission, because you don't have a lot of opportunities otherwise. And maybe for some of you, you're hoping to have a time of rest at the end of Saturday night or Sunday night. But I promise you, the rest that God will give you is far greater than any rest that you can give yourself. And maybe you have a party or some fun plans for your evenings. But again, I guarantee you, I promise you, the lasting joy and peace that God Himself can give you is far greater, far superior than any joy or peace that the world can offer you. So ultimately, this all has to start with your yes. And when you give that yes, you will start to see your life transformed, your family transformed, your workplace, everything that you do in between will start to bear fruit, because God Himself is your finish line, He Himself is your freeway, and He Himself is your fuel.